Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. A US court has asked Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to explain the illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir. The Houston District Court also sought a response from Modi over human rights violations in occupied Kashmir within 21 days. The court acted on a complaint filed by the Kashmir Khalistan Referendum Front. It says the revocation of occupied Kashmir's special status violated international laws. The front has nominated India's Interior Minister Amit Shah as the state functionary responsible for the illegal actions. Meanwhile, 6 professors from India's top science institutions have appealed to the government to end the occupied valley's lockdown. In an open letter, they wrote the blockade has been a devastating blow. They demanded the release of all the Kashmiri political prisoners arrested on spurious charges of sedition. Azad Jammu and Kashmir President Masood Khan says the world has recognized the ongoing crisis in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Speaking at the Kashmir Youth Convention in Islamabad, Masood Khan said India's lockdown cannot suppress the voice of Kashmiris. Criticizing the illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir, he paid a rich tribute to the brave Kashmiris for standing up to the Indian oppression. Masood said Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has pledged to stand by Kashmir till it is liberated from Indian occupation. Speaking at the convention, Mishal Malik, wife of detained Kashmiri leader Yasin Malik, said Kashmiri youth are guarding freedom movement. Malik also said schools have been closed in occupied Kashmir and teachers arrested leaving the valley in the worst lockdown ever. A BBC report says Indian authorities have moved hundreds of detained Kashmiris to jails elsewhere in the country. 80 of them are being held in Agra, some 700 kilometers away from home. The report says the jailed Kashmiris are not even allowed to meet their families. India has detained thousands of Kashmiris since it stripped the region of its autonomy on 5th of August. Meanwhile, India's lockdown of occupied valley has entered 47th day. Mobile phone networks, landlines and the internet are still cut off, while occupation forces continue to arrest people. India's Supreme Court has ordered a probe into complaints of illegal arrests of minors by occupation forces in Kashmir. The court has assigned the inquiry to Jammu and Kashmir High Court's Juvenile Justice Committee. The court was responding to a petition filed by child rights activists Nakshi Ganguly and Shanta Sinha. The petition said Indian occupation forces are arresting children as young as 10 years old. A 3-judge bench led by Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi rejected the Solicitor General's plea to drop the petition. Solicitor General Tushar Mehta warned the court, saying that the investigation would have widespread repercussions. The US has withdrawn about $160 million in financial assistance to Afghanistan. Washington's decision to pull funding for a major energy project deals a major blow to President Ashraf Ghani ahead of elections on September the 28th. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo cited corruption and the Afghan government's inability to transparently manage US government resources for the decision. In a statement, Pompeo said the Afghan government and leaders must be transparent and accountable to their people. Pompeo said the US stands against those who exploit positions of power and influence to deprive the Afghan people of the benefits of foreign assistance. North Korea has welcomed US President Donald Trump's suggestion for a new method for denuclearization negotiations. Pyongyang's chief nuclear negotiator Kim Myong-gil praised Trump's wise political decision. Gil said Washington should come up with a well-thought-out plan in the bilateral negotiations. Trump and Kim have met 3 times since June last year to discuss ways to resolve a crisis over North Korea's missile programs. The second meeting in Vietnam broke down after they failed to narrow a gap between the US demands for North Korean denuclearization. The 2 leaders met for a 3rd time on June the 30th in the demilitarized zone and agreed to restart working-level talks. In Yemen, the government-led military coalition has launched an operation against Houthi rebels north of the port city of Hodeidah. Spokesman Turki al-Maliki said coalition warplanes hit 4 legitimate military targets that threatened international trade in the Red Sea. He said the Houthis have used Hodeidah to launch ballistic missiles, drones, booby traps and remote-controlled boats, and to plant sea mines. The coalition strikes are the first on Hodeidah since the Stockholm Peace Agreement was signed last December. The operation was conducted after rebels claimed responsibility for airstrikes on 2 Saudi oil facilities last weekend. But Saudi Arabia and the US have rejected Houthi claims. Russia and China have vetoed a UN Security Council resolution for a ceasefire in Syria's Idlib province. 12 members voted in favor of the resolution drafted by Kuwait, Belgium and Germany. Russia and China also put forward their resolution demanding a truce with exemption for anti-terrorist operations. But it also failed to get approval of the member states, as only Russia and China backed their own draft. 9 members voted against the resolution, while South Africa, Indonesia, Ivory Coast and Equatorial Guinea abstained. Idlib is the last major rebel-held bastion in Syria after 8 years of war. Israel's center-left Blue and White Party has rejected Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's offer to form a unity government. Talking to reporters, leader Benny Gantz said that in the event a broad unity government is formed, he should be the Prime Minister. This report has more.
Netanyahu on Thursday proposed a unity government in which he and Gantz would each serve as half a term as Prime Minister. But the co-leader of the Blue and White Party, Moshe Yaalon, ruled out a coalition with Netanyahu.
With him, it will not work. We would not enter a coalition led by Netanyahu. We came to fix things, to heal rifts, get the country back on track. Because with him, it will not work.
Responding, Netanyahu said he was surprised and disappointed by the rejection of his offer. After counting of nearly all votes for the 120-seat Knesset, Gantz's party has 33 seats. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's Likud is trailing with 31 seats.
In news from Europe, Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay will hold talks with the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, later today. Ahead of the meeting in Brussels, Barclay warned the bloc against a rigid approach to negotiations. Barclay said the final details of an alternative to the controversial Irish backstop may not need be decided until the end of 2020. Earlier, European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker said a new Brexit deal could be reached before the deadline. The EU also said it has received confidential documents from the UK outlining ideas emerging from recent Brexit talks. Brussels said the documents will provide the basis for technical discussions on customs, manufactured goods and sanitary rules. UK has signed a mutual recognition agreement with Japan to protect trade relations in post-Brexit Britain. UK is looking to line up trade deals with non-EU countries to reduce the economic impact of Brexit. Trade Minister Liz Truss signed the letter with Japan's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Toshimitsu Motegi. The exchange of letters will ensure that bilateral regulations continue to be recognized after Brexit. The regulations are currently covered by the EU-Japan Mutual Recognition Agreement. Truss also asked for Japanese businesses' input regarding future opportunities in bilateral free trade.
We are launching the start of our process for the agreement of a separate free trade arrangement with Japan. And we are launching our call for input for businesses to be able to tell us where they think the biggest opportunities are in a future trading arrangement.
The EU says negotiations over a long-term transit of Russia's gas supplies through Ukraine to Europe have been constructive. Moscow and Kiev agreed to meet again to try to form an agreement before the current one ends. The deal expires in January and the race is on to consent to a new contract. This report has more.
Russia, Ukraine, and the European Commission held trilateral gas talks at a political level in Brussels. Despite failing to reach a new gas transit deal, all parties expressed optimism for future discussions.
I'm glad that we managed to create positive, working, constructive atmosphere between the ministers, Minister Novak and Minister Orgel. We agreed that they and the companies would also continue the discussion on bilateral levels.
Moscow says the trilateral gas consultations turned out to be the most constructive in many years.
In case Ukraine is unable to adopt these laws on gas unbundling in time, we are ready to work on the basis of the old contract, to propose to sign a temporary contract with Ukraine for the time needed to implement the EU law.
Ukrainian Energy Minister Oleksiy Orzel said there is still a risk Russian gas deliveries could be interrupted.
There is still a risk, but we are constructive and we are trying to do the needed work to sign the agreement on interconnection in accordance to European legislation and to sign the agreement on transportation. The tariff for this transportation depends on the volumes that will be transported through the Ukrainian infrastructure.
Moscow is building direct pipelines to Europe to bypass Ukraine as its main gas route. Ukraine fears if Moscow stops gas supplies, parts of Kyiv will be left without gas in freezing winter.
In Cambodia, 11 people have been killed in the last 10 days due to severe flash floods. Thousands of families were evacuated across 14 provinces. The National Disaster Committee says over hundreds of thousands of houses have been destroyed in southern Bongkhumum province. Local media reports villagers in the affected region have been forced to use boats for commuting. The Ministry of Water Resource forecasts that water levels will continue to rise in coming days in several southeastern provinces. 28 people have been killed in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the past 2 days. A statement by the UN Stabilizing Mission says assailants attacked displacement camps and villages across northeastern Ituri province. The statement said a series of attacks targeted civilians, including children. The victims were fleeing a resurgence of ethnic clashes between farming and the herding communities. Since early June, violence has killed over 200 people and displaced another 300,000. Libya's Coast Guard has picked up nearly 500 migrants attempting to cross the Mediterranean Sea in inflatable boats. Spokesman Ayub Qasim said the migrants, including 28 women and 5 children, are from African, Arab and Asian countries. Qasim said the migrants were detained during 6 operations of Libya's coast over the past week. He said the migrants have all been moved to detention centers run by the UN-backed government of the National Accord. Libya's western coast is a major departure point for migrants fleeing to Europe to escape war and poverty. It's time for a short break, but coming up next in the bulletin. North America loses 3 billion birds in 50 years. Capitals passed along riverbanks. Welcome back. The former head of the UK's National Health Services, Lord Nigel Crisp, says the world should learn from Pakistan's Ehsaas welfare plan. Crisp said the Ehsaas program's innovative approaches provides a model socio-economic safety net. Crisp, who was also UK's Secretary of Department of Health, said the Ehsaas initiative is the foundation of a sustainable welfare state. He said the program will lift children out of poverty and ensure gender parity in education. They include tackling corruption, gender parity, educational opportunities, and building shelter homes. Crisp called the initiative a blueprint for low, middle, and high-income countries. Austrian MPs have rejected the EU's recently agreed trade deal with the South American Mercosur bloc. This has put the fate of the project in doubt. Several European states have raised concerns over the free trade agreement reached in June after 20 years of negotiations. In a parliamentary vote yesterday, 4 out of 5 Austria's main parties refused to back the agreement. This compels the Austrian government to vote against the deal at the EU summit next month. EU rules require all 28 member states and their parliaments ratify trade deals. France backed out of the deal in August over Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro's stance on Amazon wildfires. Mercosur is a South American free trade zone comprising Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina. The symptoms of climate change are more readily apparent today than ever before. Environmental disasters, including heat waves, droughts, and hurricanes, are now occurring with unforeseen frequency. Watch this report on how several small towns are on the brink of absolute water scarcity.
Despite sitting with the basin of Australia's biggest river system, the town of Stanthorpe is set to run dry by this Christmas. This is also true for 11 other towns nearby. Australia now has no choice but to truck in water at a monthly cost of $690,000.
When you get to this level of, I suppose, despair is a big word, but sometimes that's how you feel. Sometimes I just sit and cry.
Farmers warn the ongoing drought will cost the Australian region's economy almost $70 million this harvest season. This has already had a domino effect on the economy, with several small businesses on the brink of shutting down in the 12 affected towns.
I mean, I watch the radar on the Weather Channel, and I've seen patches of rain either go below us or above us. I've then seen big patches head straight for us, and I think beauty, it's going to hit us, but it just splits before us, you know, so we just have to wait and see.
The situation is made worse by frequent bushfires, which divert precious water resources. Despite this crisis, the Australian government continues to support the local coal mining and export industry, saying they're essential for economic growth. For now, it's opted to build more dams and put more stringent restrictions on water use. However, local authorities are struggling to keep the Australian river basin from going bone dry.
In Bolivia, water resources are running dry in La Paz, the world's highest city. Locals are trying to find new ways to tackle the situation. This report has more.
As global temperatures rise, glaciers all over the world are melting into the sea, wasting precious freshwater resources. And South America is no different. The same is true for La Paz in Bolivia. As the Andean glaciers melt, locals are left facing a severe drought, with mismanagement making things worse. Now the sky-high city's 2.7 million citizens are finding new ways to get by.
Water levels are already dropping. I mean, in the mountains, the snow is thawing. There isn't much left. The warming is affecting our country, mostly in La Paz. And because of these cases of water crisis that we lived through, that is why I take care of the water for the next generations.
The local population are using wash houses for laundry, storing and recycling the rainwater.
When we shower here at home, we recycle and use it also to try to not use up the potable water.
Patricia Urqueta, an urban planning specialist, says no public policy to raise awareness about water scarcity has been initiated. This despite the fact that reports show La Paz could soon end up dry as a bone.
The weather is changing. It is not like it was before. We used to wait for, let's say, spring and then the rainy season. Now it is happening already. In winter it rains as well. And sometimes in the rainy season it is hot. We are all subject to this.
The Bolivian government has spent $64.7 million to construct 4 water reservoirs and supply systems from the lagoons of the surrounding Andean highlands. UNESCO warns climate change could cause the loss of 95% of Bolivia's permafrost by the year 2050. By 2099, this figure could rise to 99%.
Tens of thousands of protesters across the world have responded to the call for climate change today. Protests are planned in some 150 countries. They will culminate in New York when Greta Thunberg will lead the march to the UN headquarters next week. From the Pacific Islands, which risk inundation, to other parts of the world, people are out on streets. They are calling on the governments to take urgent action to stop environmental catastrophe. In Australia, the world's largest exporter of coal and liquid natural gas, people are urging the government to cut carbon emissions by 2030. Demonstrations have started in New Zealand, Australia, Thailand, Pakistan and South Korea, whereas more demonstrations would be seen as the day progresses. Birds are disappearing at an alarming rate in the United States and Canada. There has been a 29% population drop since 1970 and a net loss of about 2.9 billion birds. More in this report.
Environmental degradation has caused drastic habitat loss, especially for birds. The intensification of agriculture and land use changes are placing pressure on bird populations. Each of the 12 bird families have lost more than 50 million individuals in the US and Canada.
What we found was staggering, it was depressing, that there was a decline in over 29% of birds, 3 billion birds lost over those 50 years.
While climate change was not the major driver of the population plunge, it is likely to exacerbate threats to bird populations in the future, researchers said. They said the extinction of the passenger pigeon in the early 20th century shows that even abundant species can go extinct rapidly.
The good news is that nature is resilient once given a chance. So if we as humans act on this, if we start to really value nature, value birds, put policies into place that are going to protect these animals that we share in our common home, that these birds will respond. They'll respond rapidly. In 5 or 10 years, we could easily see some of these species starting to increase. It can happen that fast.
However, banning the pesticide DDT has allowed for the resurgence of raptor populations, including the bald eagle. So there might be a solution to this endemic after all.
In the United Kingdom, mudlarks have been scouring the shores of the River Thames in London to unearth the historical items. This report will show how she collects metal pins, century-old coins and clay pipes. They still bear the maker's fingerprints.
On the banks of the River Thames, Laura Micklem is looking for treasure. She is out mudlarking, scavenging for items of value long hidden in the riverbed. Mudlarks have scoured the foreshore of London's river for centuries, searching out lost or discarded items to sell. And the tradition lives on today in a small band of devotees like Laura.
For me, it's not about finding things of that are worth lots of money. It's just that feeling of picking something up and being the first person to hold it, or find something that almost change history because no one's ever found anything like that.
The practice is highly regulated and mudlarks need a license from the Port of London Authority. Anything of archaeological interest must be declared. But for Laura, the joy is in the more commonplace finds, like this 6-pence coin. Laura and other mudlarks work with museums to help identify and preserve their finds. Some are on display at this exhibition at the Museum of London Docklands. Its aim to reveal the secrets of London's historic waterways.
The Thames is the city's longest archaeological site, but it is vulnerable, it is fragile, and the mudlarks do excellent work at recording and helping to save that information.
Many of the rivers, streams and brooks that cut through London have been built over and lost, but the Thames remains at its heart. Its tidal waters still leave evidence of centuries of life, work and death on the shore, sparking the interest of many determined to uncover the secrets it still holds.
And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. Thank you for watching. For further updates, stay tuned in this series.